Regular viewers may remember that I recently boosted the ranks of my 10mm fantasy armies, our Fantastic Battles Bane Wars campaign, with some new figures. And these figures were metal, and basically it was a selection of various beasties and creatures. Now, most of those were one-piece castings, no problem, a little bit of clean-up, spray them and then get painting, but one particular set of figures needed a little bit of assembly, and that's something that I've been having a little bit of trouble with. So today on Dragon's Teeth we're talking about gluing gargoyles. Hi, I'm Rob Poyton, thanks for joining me today. Now here's one of the figures in question, a 10mm gargoyle. I'll put a link to the manufacturer down in the notes below because these are all great figures. I've got some bears, rhinos, ogres, various other bits and pieces, but I particularly wanted some gargoyles as well, and they come in two parts. I'll do a bit of a close-up in a moment, but there's our gargoyle, and we have a lovely set of bat wings to go with it. And I've been trying for a not inconsiderable amount of time to use super glue to connect the two together, and so far, out of I think I've got maybe half a dozen there or so, I've only managed to get one to stick. Obviously I'm doing something wrong. I was chatting to Ove down at Bedford Gladiators the other day and mentioned this problem to him because he's been doing a lot of assembly lately of MDF buildings and various other things. And he gave me a tip. He said with the super glue, rather than put a load on the figure and then try and stick, put some onto a tile or something similar, then use like a toothpick to apply just a little bit of super glue to the figure, and you should find that the wings will stick much easier. So I'm going to be giving that a try today. If that works, fingers crossed, wings crossed, then I'll get my gargoyles assembled. We'll get everything undercoated and then we'll go through painting. If I've got time today, I'll paint up not only these 10mm but some of my 28mm fantasy figures as well, which have been undercoated. They've been dry brushed with grey and white, so they're ready to be finished as well. In other words, it's going to be a day of painting, and hopefully I'll get everything finished. Let's see. We'll start with the important stuff though, what I'm listening to today, and this is an album by my friend from France, Jean-Baptiste Perez. I guess you'd call it experimental jazz. He has a very novel composition method, but we don't really have time to go into that today. Anyway, that's going to be the soundtrack, and I'd just like to mention as well, for the first time in ages, we've got a nice sunny day. So look at that, there's Buster, the guard dog. And Mrs. Dragon is also doing some spraying today. How about that? The dragons that spray together, stay together. On to our figures then. So these are Pendragon figures, 10mm gargoyles, metal. And as you can see, they're very nice sculpts. But if you notice on the back there, there's a small hole. That's where the wings fit in. So I'm going to widen that hole a little bit, I think. And also just rough up the back. Here's the wings. So as you can see, we've got that pin in the middle, but it's not very big. I think I'm going to rough these up a little bit as well to help them key in. The nice thing with these is they're quite soft, so you can bend them a little bit. So the gargoyles have sort of different shaped wings, which adds a little bit of interest to the pose, I think. So I'm just going to smooth out the back a little bit as well. They're quite contoured, these backs. Smooth it out and then also just put some keying in. Hopefully that will help get a closer fit. And this is quite soft metal, so it's easy to work with. And then, as I said, that hole, I just want to make it a little more defined. The pin is not that big, but the hole is, well, there's barely any hole there at all. So I'm just going to define that a little bit more. So now it's a bit of glue just on some plastic sheet there, a bit of plastic card. And then I'm going to use a cocktail stick to just apply a couple of dabs of that to the back of the figure. I think before I was putting on way too much glue. It was coming straight out from the applicator and was probably taking so long to actually bond and dry. That's where my problem was. And then we're going to take the wings and press them on. I should really be wearing gloves. I'm going to get some gloves actually, because I do find with super glue it tends to stick everything to your fingers quite easily. And there we are. Look at that. That's gone straight away this time. That's stuck on straight away. Slightly crooked maybe, but you know, it's a gargoyle. They're meant to be crooked. So excellent. That method has worked really well. So I'm going to repeat this now for the remaining gargoyles. So I've got the gargoyles all glued together now. I'm putting those and the other figures on double-sided tape onto my sticks, and then it's time to give them a spray. I'm just using a conventional spray paint, quite a cheap one. I find that works well enough for me. So while I'm waiting for that undercoat to dry, I thought I'd get started on my 28mm figures. And I'm going to start with a figure of a ranger. Rangers, of course, a lot of green, so I'm using my speed paint here, Orc Skin, which is a nice bright green. And there's the figure. As you can see, that's been undercoated and prepared. And I'm using my spice jars as handles. So it's stuck on the lid with some blue tack. I find they're a very good size, very easy to handle, and stable as well when I put them down. And we're going to start with that green for the cloak. So a very nice bright green. And I do find with these speed paints, well, as the name implies, they go on very easily, very smoothly. It doesn't take much to cover even a fairly large area like this. And with that sort of grey and white highlighting underneath, that saves a lot of time on shading later on. So that's the cloak done. Now for the chainmail, I'm using one of my old coat d'arms paints because they're still very usable. And again, this is just to cover all the chainmail on the front. It's probably the second largest area on the figure. And then we're on to another speed paint, Satchel Brown, for the boots and the gloves. So I figure a ranger is going to be fairly subdued colours of green and brown. Seems pretty natural. The only bright spots on this figure really is the chainmail, which I'll probably wash down a bit to take a little bit of shine off that, and the sword. And he's wearing some sort of gem or jewel at the neck, I think. So we'll put maybe a gold colour in on that. A little more coat d'arms. This is greenish grey, and this is for the leggings and the sleeves. Again, just keeping everything nice and subdued. And then some red brown, just so there's a couple of bits of leather showing, some, I guess it's like a jerkin underneath the chainmail. I'll probably do the belt black, just as a contrast. There's sort of pouch on the belt as well, so that'll be in this red brown. And some more speed paint black. Actually, I'm going to use this for the hair as well. I thought I'd give that a try. So that's going to be the belt and the hair. And again, that speed paint goes on very easily. Followed by some peachy flesh for the skin. There's just the face to paint for this. I figured a ranger is going to be fairly weather beaten. So I've not done any undercoat in flesh. I've just gone straight for the speed paint there. Then it's just a question of some silver for the sword. And that gem I mentioned earlier, I'm using an old Tamiya gold leaf. Actually, I think this is quite a new one. This was unopened, so that's quite new. And that is just going to be that gem or jewel or whatever it is. The clasp of the cloak, I guess, is what it is. And that's the ranger largely finished. I'm going to go over with a wash on the chainmail, maybe one or two other areas. I also had an issue with the face. I put some flesh highlights on after from one of my old paints, and I found it didn't react very well with the speed paint. So I think the trick for that in the future is to put the older flesh colour on first, let that really dry overnight, and then come in with the speed paint on top. I think that will work a lot better. But overall, I'm pleased with that. That's pretty much done. I'm really liking that green for the cloak. I'm a little bit tempted to put some camouflage on that. Back in the day with the 25mm minifigs ranges, there was a bit of a hoo-ha at the Wargaming Club because someone painted them all in Waffen SS P-dot camouflage pattern, which looked very nice and is obviously very effective, but maybe not quite the thing for Rangers of the North. And in the meantime, our undercoat has dried there, so now I'm going to dry brush these German grey and then some white on top of that. There's a nice rhino. That won't need much doing to it after that grey goes on. And this is how the gargoyles look with the grey and the white dry brush. So, you know, they look really good like that. And of course gargoyles generally are grey because they're made of stone. But I thought I'd go for something different. So I thought they might look good in a nice red colour. So what I've chosen here is Speed Slaughter Red. These are all Army Painters paints, of course. Slaughter Red seemed quite appropriate. And once again, that goes on very nicely, really works well with the dry brushing method there. Just one other thing I'll mention with the speed paints is with normal acrylic paints, the way you paint, the way they go on is the way they look. With speed paints, I find they go on and then once they've dried, they change a little bit. They become a little bit lighter and that highlighting underneath becomes more apparent. So don't just sort of give one coat of paint and look at it and think, oh, I need to do that again. Just let them sit and dry for a bit and you'll see the change. And there's our gargoyles finished, or at least finished for now. That's literally just the undercoat, the dry brushes and the speed paint, and they're already looking pretty good. I'm going to go in and add a couple of little details here and there, maybe pick out the eyes, the horns, another couple of little bits and pieces, and of course they'll be based up as well. But yeah, looking really good and very quick and easy to do now, now that I'm using Ove's super glue method. By the way, if you're into gargoyles and you're into weird fiction, do check out our Clark Ashton Smith podcast, Strange Shadows. We actually covered an excellent story of his called The Maker of Gargoyles a couple of weeks back. It's set in medieval France and it features, well, let's just call it some gargoyle shenanigans, shall we? Really good story. So I'll put the link up to that in the notes below. And while I had the paints out and I was waiting for the other bits and pieces to dry, I made a start on some other figures there. We've got a lovely 10mm sort of temple guardian snake. We've got a vampire lord on a winged beast. And then some 28mm stuff, some more of my fantasy figures. We've got a hobbit assassin and a wizard or a mage there. And I think that's like a hobbit magic user. They've actually got 3 of these figures. They're very nice. I'm calling them murder hobbits. They all look quite aggressive. So that's a start made on those as well. Well, there we are. I'm pleased with the amount of painting I managed to get done there. That's a good chunk of stuff done. The 10mm are going to be used very soon because we've got the Bane Wars campaign going on. Keep an eye out on the Bane Wars playlist for that. And the 28mm, of course, are going into the skirmish game. Now I've got pretty much all of the figures painted up. I've got the rules about 80% in place. I'm going to be making some terrain, some specific terrain for the first scenario, which is going to be centered around an old haunted cemetery. So hopefully that will be coming up in the next couple of weeks. Thanks again for watching. As always, keep all your suggestions, comments, subscriptions, shares and likes coming in. It really does help the channel, and I'll see you next time.